Welcome everyone to the Accelerant Thought Leadership Series webinar on maximizing employee engagement to drive financial results. My name is Joanne Brunn, the CEO of Accelerant, and I'll be your moderator today. In just a minute, I'll be introducing our guest speaker, but first I want to go through our agenda and cover a few housekeeping points. So I'm going to start the presentation with a quick overview of Accelerant and why we feel that employee engagement is an essential component of good financial practices. Then Jennifer Eversole will be describing the various aspects of employee engagement, how it drives financial results, how you get employees to be engaged, and how you measure it. I'll then do a quick wrap-up and we'll answer any questions that came in during the webinar. So all of your lines are muted. And if you'd like to ask a question, please use the question box on your GoToWebinar panel. And we will have a short Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we'll answer as many questions as we can get to. But if we don't get to your questions today, we will follow up with you afterwards. So I'd like now to introduce our guest speaker, Jennifer Eversole. Jennifer is a graduate of Roanoke College, is a licensed certified public accountant in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and a recipient of the Virginia CFO Award. She serves on the board of directors of the Virginia Society of Certified Public Accountants, is active in the Roanoke chapter of the VSCPA, and is a member of the American Institute of CPAs. Jennifer believes that a great strategy, coupled with a culture of employee engagement, leads to more customer loyalty, better business processes, and improved profits, which of course is why we've asked her to present with us today. So who are we? We at Accelerant provide a cloud-based budgeting and forecasting solution designed with an easy-to-use interface that makes complex processes accessible for all users. It was actually created by former finance and IT execs who had experienced firsthand the time-consuming frustrations of budgeting and forecasting with Excel-based templates and recognized that the industry really needed a solution that worked for the finance team as well as the end user. We serve mid-market organizations who value collaborative environments and know that that is an effective way to engage employees and achieve their strategic objectives. And in industry surveys, clients have recognized us for exceptional ease of use, quick implementation, and great support. And our dedication to collaboration started with our founders, who really believe that ownership and participation are required in order to budget to strategy, and that the best thinking comes from the department heads who are the experts in their area. And successfully engaging those department managers in the budgeting process is probably the single most important element in achieving a budget with accurate estimates and increasing ownership of the numbers going forward. So ultimately, the budget needs to be a numerical expression of the strategic plan, and that requires engagement, communication, and collaboration. And engagement is such a foundational concept for us, and we believe a critical component to achieving an organization's strategy, that we included in our tagline. And it's the reason we are hosting this webinar today. And so without further delay, I'll turn the presentation over to Jennifer. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And you are now presenter.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Joanne, and good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Joanne and Accelerant for inviting me to speak to you today about employee engagement. Employee engagement is a topic that I get very excited about, and it used to be one that was reserved only for HR professionals, but that's changed. Accelerant is a great example of a forward-thinking company who is focused on engagement as a critical success factor across the entire organization. In fact, even their mission statement has culture at the core, which I think is wonderful. So hats off to Joanne and her team for bringing this great topic to finance professionals today. So let's jump right in and get everybody going with a quick poll. First, the first question we'd like to ask is, why are you interested in learning more about employee engagement today? So what is your reason for joining us? Is it personal interest, maybe an initiative going on at your company? Perhaps you'd like to learn how to address challenges in your culture, or maybe you're interested in improving productivity, or perhaps something else. So let's go ahead and just jump right in and see if we can get those answers.
Okay, so please take a few minutes now to vote, and I'll give everyone about 10 more seconds to vote, and then I'll close the poll. All right. It looks like we're good, so I'm going to close that poll. Oh, people are still voting. Here we go. Okay, so let me close the poll and let me share that. So Jennifer, can you see those results?
I can see those results. So we have about 19% in the personal interest, 19% in initiative, 44% addressing challenges, and 48% interested in improving productivity, with the remaining having other response. So it looks like the responses are pretty divided among the different categories, but productivity seems to be among the most, as well as challenges in the culture. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about some of those things and touch on some things that will help both improve productivity and address the challenges, as well as the other items. So great. Thank you for participating.
Okay, so I'm going to close that poll and then back over to you.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll go ahead and jump right in. Simon Sinek is one of my favorite thought leaders today. Many of you have probably heard of him. In a famous TED Talk in, I think it was 2009, Simon talked about how leaders communicate. In the talk, he pointed out that most leaders talk about what they do. So that's the product or the services that they sell or make to make money. Some leaders talk about how. So that's the process that sets them apart. So what's their differentiator? But very few leaders talk about, and most don't even know, their why. And that's the reason that their business exists in the first place. So Simon points out that the reason you exist is not to generate a profit. That's the result. So we're talking about your purpose, your greater purpose, and why your company exists. Simon argues that when we start with why in everything that we do, we inspire action in a way that the what doesn't. So the why is what engages our emotions and our feelings and makes us feel like companies. But the what is what that engages our logical brain. So that's a more superficial feeling. But when we try to sell the what, we have to rely on manipulations like price to influence people. But when we focus on attracting customers that understand and believe in our why, that's when we build trust. My why has to do with workplace happiness. Cultivating workplace happiness is why I do what I do every day. And when I talk about that, people often wonder what I mean. So workplace happiness conjures all these images of nap pods, ping pong tables in the break room, those things that we're hearing about in the companies that are more progressive these days, or thought of that way anyway. But I think of it very differently. Those things are great perks, but in and of themselves, they don't lend themselves to real happiness at work. Happiness at work is a product of a great business environment with three key ingredients: a sound business strategy, a solid internal control framework, and a culture of engagement. So I'm here today to talk to you about one of those key ingredients in happy companies, employee engagement. But first, strategy and internal controls are also both very important. So bear with me while I take a few minutes just to talk about their role in the happy workplace. A sound business strategy is critical for success so that people know where the leaders are taking the company. The company strategy is the roadmap to achieve the vision. It has to be dynamic, it has to be changing, and it has to be communicated to the employees with every single pivot. Leaders just can't assume that everyone sort of knows what to do, and we've probably all seen organizations like that where the leaders know what to do, so they just kind of assume that everyone else does also, but that's usually not the case. So a great strategy can have four elements to it. First, you have to have the vision. The vision has to tell everyone where the company wants to go. You have to know your destination in order to be able to get there. Next are objectives. Objectives are those key areas in which the efforts need to be focused in order to get the company where it wants to go. Strategy should also have initiatives, or those are the specific projects or tasks that employees will work on that support the objectives. So those are the things that actually move the company to where they need to go. And the initiatives are very important in terms of engagement because they align the work that employees do every day with the important things that drive success. So finally, there must be measures. You have to know where you are in terms of the objectives in order to know if the initiatives are having the right effect in moving the company towards the vision. So the second ingredient in a happy company is a solid internal control framework. So the mere mention of internal controls usually conjures images of red tape and bureaucracy that prevents people from getting things done. And I can certainly understand that. The word control is right there in the name, and generally people don't like things that try to influence or direct their behavior. Unfortunately, internal control has gotten somewhat of a bad rap as a necessary evil that disrupts the work that needs to get done. But done right, internal controls are immensely valuable to an organization by helping to ensure that the company, its teams, and its employees meet the desired objectives. I like to say that internal controls are what keeps the strategy off the shelf. So we've all heard the stories about a strategy and being implemented and created and then kind of gets put on the shelf and not looked at again. It's the internal controls that underpin those the strategy that helps keep it off the shelf. So internal controls are activities that are put in place to mitigate risks throughout the organization. Risks are often thought of in terms of fraud or errors, but businesses are also faced with the risks such as losing customers or employees. So a great internal control framework keeps all types of risks in check. So now let's get right to employee engagement. That's the third ingredient in the happy workplace. So today I'd like to talk about what it is, how does it drive financial results, how do you get it, and finally, how do you measure it? Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb and make a confession. I am a numbers person. Not surprisingly, I've been accused of being very black and white at times, and that's why I like working with lagging indicators. Lagging indicator is a KPI that follows an event. So say you're on a diet with a goal of losing 10 pounds in a month. The measure of how much you weigh at the end of the month, so you get through your period and you get on the scale, and the number that's there is your lagging indicator telling you if you've met your goal. So translate that to the business finance environment. Typical lagging indicators are things like net income or profit margin. I am very comfortable with lagging indicators because they can be verified. And guess what? The numbers can prove that I am right. On the other hand, leading indicators, they're arguably more important because they signal future events. In the example of being on a diet, how many calories you consume in a given week is a leading indicator that signals how much weight you will have lost at the end of the month. It's important to know if you've consumed too many calories so that you can adjust your plan if necessary and still meet your goal. In the business world, customer loyalty is a leading indicator that signals revenue earned from repeat customers. If customer loyalty starts slipping, it's important to identify that trend before the end of the period so that it can be corrected as quickly as possible. So employee engagement is a critical leading indicator. It gives indications of future profitability because it drives so many economic factors within the organization. As a matter of fact, it is such an important predictor of future financial performance that CFOs and other financial executives and professionals just simply cannot afford to ignore it. So that being said, let's jump in with another poll. So if you could just let us know how you would describe the level of employee engagement at your organization. Would you consider generally the workforce to be highly engaged, moderately disengaged, or highly disengaged? So I'll give you a moment for that.
All right, so the poll is now launched. Everyone would please vote. And give another 10 seconds. Okay, so let me close the poll now, and let me share the results. So there you have it, Jennifer. B is the winner.
Okay, yes, we have, it looks like about 83% are either moderately engaged or moderately disengaged. So it looks like there's a lot of people that consider their organization to be kind of right there on that fence. So as you would expect, the highly engaged and highly disengaged are the outliers there. So that's good information to have. It's good to hear that most people do think that their workforce is moderately engaged. So hopefully we'll be able to move that needle on up and we can have some highly engaged workforces along the way.
Okay, so let me hide that and back to you.
Okay, great. Okay, Clarence Francis was chairman of the board of General Foods, and he said these words in 1954. He said, "You can buy a man's time, you can buy a man's physical presence at a given place, you can even buy a measured number of skilled muscular motions per hour or day. but you cannot buy enthusiasm. You cannot buy initiative. You cannot buy loyalty. You cannot buy the devotion of hearts, minds, and souls. You have to earn these things. So while the concept is certainly not new, employee engagement has become a buzzword in recent years, thanks to business leaders worldwide who have been placing an increasing amount of importance on it. But what exactly is it? In a nutshell, employee engagement is defined by an employee's commitment to the company. Couples get engaged every day because they are committed to one another. The same concept applies to the employee-employer relationships. In order for employees to be engaged at work and therefore committed to the organization, they must believe that the company is committed to them also. Also, employee engagement is demonstrated through behavior. Engaged employees believe in their company and they're going to do what's best to help move the company forward, even when nobody's looking, and that's the key. They go above and beyond, not just because they want personal gain or recognition, but also just to help the company succeed. They do have a personal stake in the company's success, and they'll proudly tout their employers to others in their everyday lives. There are three different forms of engagement. They're different dimensions, actually. So we have intellectual engagement, affective engagement, and social engagement. So let's talk about what those are briefly. So first is intellectual engagement. Intellectual engagement means that you are always thinking about the job and how to do it better. It means being engaged with your works, with the actual work that you're doing. Intellectually engaged employees are willing to put in hard work and extra effort to ensure that the job is done well. They are always concerned about continuous improvement and, again, just the best way to do the job. They're stimulated by the work that they do. It's where they get their enthusiasm and energy. They take pride in and care about their work and always work to the best of their ability. They go above and beyond rather than just meeting minimum requirements, and they're willing to put in the extra time when it's needed. Back in 1957, Peter Drucker predicted that the most valuable asset of the 21st century institution would be knowledge workers and their productivity. He couldn't have been more right. Knowledge workers are employees whose main capital is knowledge. They're the people whose job it is to just think for a living. A vast majority of employees today are required to use judgment and decision-making in their daily work lives, making it more important than ever for employees to be engaged with their company so that the decisions that they make every day are supportive of the company's success. Next is affective engagement. Affective engagement is the feeling of being positively present and feeling good about being at work. So the affectively engaged employee is actually happy to be at work. It's the difference between someone who drags their heels in the morning and someone who is energized about what they're going to achieve that day because they know that the work that they do matters. Back in 2007, there was a professor, Dr. Adam M. Grant, who is an author and a professor at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. He has been recognized as being both the youngest tenured and the most highly rated professor at the Wharton School. So in 2007, Dr. Grant and his colleagues worked with call center employees at the University of Michigan. They had the fun task of cold calling alumni to ask for money. One of the groups in his study actually got to meet a scholarship recipient and talk to him firsthand. The scholarship recipient was sure to tell the call center workers how much the scholarship had changed his life. He thanked them for all that they had done. He told them that their work matters and was important. After the call center workers met him and realized how their work had an impact and how what they were doing every day actually made a difference, their greater purpose, they instantly became motivated. Their weekly revenue almost instantly increased by 400%. So translate that to the business environment, and the results can be astounding. So those who met the scholarship recipient were affectively engaged in their work because they were able to see a direct line between the task that they were doing and the greater purpose. Vince Lombardi said, individual commitment to a group effort, that's what makes a team work, a company work, a society work, a civilization work. Social engagement is about experiencing positive emotions and meaningful connections in the workplace. That often leads to shared ideas and further improvement. Socially engaged employees feel strong and positive connections with the company and with their coworkers. They're driven by a belief in the company's vision and by a strong culture. Socially engaged employees are way more likely to share ideas and knowledge, which always leads to people learning from each other and helping each other improve. They are more likely to speak positively about the company, and make no mistake, in this age of social media where people are ever more connected, how people speak about the company to others is increasingly important. So you may have noticed over the past several years, months, that you are more and more frequently asked the question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this product or service to a friend or colleague? That question comes from a management tool called the Net Promoter Score, or NPS as it's sometimes called. NPS is a registered trademark of Fred Reichheld, Bain & Company, and Satmetrics. And they did years and years of research about customer behavior. And it all boiled down to that one question. The research shows a high correlation between a positive response to this question and positive customer behavior, including things like repurchasing or referring or any other activities that positively impact the company's growth. This concept has been expanded to measure employee loyalty by asking employees if they would recommend their company to a friend or colleague. So the way it works is that those who respond with a 9 or a 10 are considered promoters. Scores of a 7 or 8 means that they are passives, and 0 to 6 are classified as detractors. So to calculate the NPS score, you subtract the percentage of detractors from the percentage of promoters, and you end up with a number. So an organization with a high NPS can be proud of the fact that they have high levels of social engagement by their employees. It means that employees will go out and speak positively about the companies, whether in face-to-face interactions or on social media. So that's a little bit about what engagement is. So we have its commitment. We know that we have intellectual engagement, affective engagement, social engagement. But why is it important? Why do we hear people talking about it all the time? The importance, I believe, is rooted in a psychological theory called cognitive dissonance. So employee engagement is important because it drives behavior. And behavior has been proven to drive organizational results. But what's the connection between an individual's belief and their behavior? The connection can be explained by this theory. So when an individual's attitudes and beliefs conflict with their behavior, we automatically have a feeling of discomfort. We instinctively seek to restore the harmony and rid ourselves of any discomfort by changing either the belief or the behavior when the two are not congruent. So let's assume that you're a highly engaged employee and you're going about supporting the company's success and doing everything that you can, whether anybody's looking or not, to help the company succeed. And then all of a sudden, maybe you discover that the company is acting in a way that you think is unethical. So subconsciously, you have two choices, because now you have an unethical situation, but you're exhibiting this behavior that doesn't support that belief. So you can rationalize and convince yourself that the actions of the company aren't that bad. So maybe you convince yourself that it's really not that bad. Maybe they're not hurting anybody. So we're going to accept that and keep on with our behavior. Or you can change your behavior and by quitting or exposing the unethical actions. Behaviors are always inherently easier to adjust than beliefs. So that means that most likely it's your behavior that's going to change and not your beliefs. So if employees believe in the company, it's easy for them to act accordingly. If they believe that the company is supporting them, if they believe that the company's purpose is honorable and great, and they can see the greater purpose in that, the behavior follows. And behavior, of course, is what drives the results. So quickly, let's move on to our third poll. And this time we'd like to find out who is responsible for employee engagement in your organization. Is it HR, CEO, CFO? Is nobody responsible, or an other?
Okay, so let me launch that poll for our participants and see what they have to say about who is responsible in their company. Right, so we'll just give a few more seconds. And let everyone vote. All right, it looks like everyone is done voting. Let me close that and share it.
Okay, so we have 16% human resources, 23 CEO, 13 CFO, 29% say nobody, and 39% is other. Well, I would be interested to learn about the other, but it looks like it's pretty evenly spread across the organization. I am a little surprised that 13% say that the CFO is responsible. So I think that's good. It should be the responsibility of everybody in the organization, and perhaps that's what the other is. So, okay, well, with that, we'll move on.
Okay, so let me hide that, and back to you.
Okay, great. Okay, so how does employee behavior drive financial results? So let's start by looking at the data. I know that as finance people, typically we're numbers people, and we like to have information that's rooted in hard data. So that's what I have for you today. So let's start with Gallup's 2013 State of the American Workforce Study. Gallup analyzed 250,000 survey results over a period of time and grouped the companies from least to most engaged. They looked at 9 performance areas and compared the top quartile companies to the bottom quartile companies. What they found was that the top quartile companies had 37% less absenteeism. Turnover was down anywhere from 25 to 65%, depending on the level of turnover in the company. Inventory shrinkage was 28% less. There were 41 to 48% less safety incidents, 41% less defects, 10% higher customer retention, 21% higher productivity, and 22% higher profitability. So according to Gallup, all this means that concentrating on employee engagement can help companies withstand and possibly even thrive in tough economic times. In that same poll, in that same study, they reported that increased engagement leads to higher earnings per share also. Companies with an average of 9.3 engaged employees for every actively disengaged employee experienced 147% higher earnings per share compared with their competition. Companies with an average of 2.6 engaged employees for every actively disengaged employee experienced 2% lower earnings per share than their competition. And by the way, Gallup's sort of benchmark for that is that a 12-to-1 ratio, so 12 engaged employees for every actively disengaged employee is best in class. So research discovered that as the economy began to rebound after 2009, having an engaged workforce became a really strong differentiator in earnings per share. Companies with engaged workforces seem to have an advantage in regaining and growing their earnings per share at a faster rate than their industry equivalents. On the other hand, companies with average engagement levels saw no increased advantage over their competitors in the economic recovery. Okay, Towers Watson conducted a global workforce study in 2012 also. So in that study, they define sustainable engagement. So they introduced a new term called sustainable engagement. And they define it as traditional engagement plus enablement plus energy. So to me, that means that employees have a culture of engagement as well as access to the tools that they need to succeed. So they're sort of taking it a step further. They report that companies with low traditional engagement have operating margins of 9.9. Companies with high traditional engagement have operating margins of 14.3%. And then the companies with the high sustainable engagement have operating margins of 27.4%. So all that means that companies with high sustainable engagement have margins that are almost 3 times that of employees with low traditional engagement levels. So that just is another confirmation that employee engagement has a direct line to the financial results. So as if the evidence that correlates high engagement to financial success isn't enough, McLean and Company studied just how much disengaged employees can cost a company. They report that disengaged employees cost the American economy up to $350 billion per year due to lost productivity. They report that a disengaged employee costs an organization $3,400 for every $10,000 in annual salary. So that means that a disengaged employee who makes $50,000 a year is actually costing the company an additional $17,000 disengagement penalty. So if companies want to bolster productivity and profitability, increase customer loyalty and operating income, slash attrition and disengagement losses, they have to engage their employees. So let's talk about turnover for a minute. So back to Gallup's 2013 State of the American Workforce Study. They report that about half, actually it's 47%, of actively disengaged millennials strongly agree that they will switch jobs, compared with fewer than 1 in 5, 17% of engaged millennials. The same is true of 9% of engaged versus 44% of actively disengaged members of Gen X, and 5% of engaged versus 36% of actively disengaged baby boomers. Their research shows that focusing on opportunity to do best and mission and purpose are the strongest factors for retaining employees. So why do we care about turnover anyway? And we all know because it is costly. Employee departures cost a company time, money, other resources, things like diminished productivity of the team and managers who are covering for the vacant position, diminished productivity of the team and managers who are just spending their time training a new hire, increased labor costs because you might have overtime or you might need to hire a contractor. And then, of course, you have the hard hiring and onboarding costs that's associated with the turnover. PricewaterhouseCoopers reported that combined, these turnover-related costs represent more than 12% of pre-tax income for the average company. And if you turn around and look at companies that have a high turnover in the 75th percentile, turnover costs can be nearly 40% of earnings. So those are real hard dollars that can be saved. Also, SHRM research suggests that direct replacement costs can reach as high as 50 to 60% of an employee's annual salary, with total cost associated with turnover ranging from 90 to 200% of salary. So the bottom line is we need to keep people engaged so that they want to stay with us so that we can reduce this turnover as much as possible. The American Management Association is a world leader in talent development, so they surveyed 1,200 executives and managers. When asked, in recent years, does your organization prefer to recruit new employees rather than retain and develop existing ones? 55% responded that they have no overriding preference, but act according to shifting business needs. 11% responded that they expect high turnover and recruit aggressively. 34% responded that they focus on developing and retaining current employees. So Sam Davis, who's the vice president of the American Management Association, pointed out, with only 34% of organizations committed to developing and retaining employees, it's easy to see why loyalty has declined. So knowing what we know about how employee engagement drives financial results, companies who focus on it simply have a leg up on the competition. So now we've talked about what employee engagement is and why it's important and how it drives financial results. So let's talk for a few minutes about how do you get it. So we've already talked about how employee behavior drives organizational results, and behaviors are a manifestation of our beliefs. In order to change long-term behavior, an individual first has to modify the belief behind the behavior. Engaged employees hold beliefs about the companies and the leaders that they choose to work for. So the first of these beliefs is that the company is committed to them. In other words, the engaged employees have leaders who ask not what the employees can do for the company, but what the company can do for the employees. Commitment to employees absolutely can't be faked. Leaders have to take a genuine interest in their employees' success. I was talking recently to a CEO who had a workforce that consisted primarily of debt collectors. He knew that the turnover rate for debt collectors is extremely high just given the nature of the job. He told me that people who came to him for a job typically did so because they couldn't find a job anywhere else. It was basically just a last resort. So simple math about turnover rates and the size of the local workforce told him that the workforce where he was just was not going to support the industry average turnover rate. So he knew that he had to somehow beat that average in order to succeed. He had to somehow make those employees want to stay. he decided that he would approach his workforce with a very genuine attitude of helping them build their professional skills so that they could go find another job. So he wasn't gaming them, he wasn't trying to trick them or manipulate them. He actually wanted to genuinely help them develop their skills so that they could find other jobs. That's how he interacted with people, but of course he hoped that doing that meant that they wouldn't want to leave because they would know that he was invested in their success. He proudly went on to tell me that his engagement strategy was wildly successful, so he considerably beat the industry averages for turnover and went on to build a workforce of, believe it or not, highly engaged debt collectors. So one way to demonstrate the commitment to employees is to implement a coaching system in place of traditional performance reviews. Many companies we're hearing about in the news these days are abandoning the use of performance review systems that are autocratic, judgment-based, and top-down. And that's not to say that all of the systems out there are. It's just, generally speaking, people just don't like performance reviews. In reality, most performance reviews are based on recent performance. They ignore accomplishments and struggles throughout the entire review period. Managers typically aren't comfortable in the role of judge, and employees are sometimes demoralized by the process. So the world has changed. Peter Deming said, if your system does more harm than good, stop doing it. So don't wait to replace it with something better, just stop doing it. In his book, Catalytic Coaching, there's an author named Gary Markle. He talks about how coaching rather than reviewing employees is key to success. Coaching is an interactive process that helps another person improve, learn something, or take their performance to the next level. So there are many advantages to the employee and many benefits to the employer. So if you break it down, really, the primary element of coaching is simply talking to employees. Well, actually, it's more about listening to employees and finding out what they want and how they want to contribute to the company's success. Another way to engage employees is to actually show them their contribution to the company's success. So give them that direct line between the work that they are doing today. Give them that line of sight to the vision and show them why they're doing what they're doing and how that does make a difference. We have a bus driver here on the screen, and the bus driver's supervisor could treat her as though her job is just to drive kids around. Or the bus driver's supervisor could help her recognize that she actually has a serious impact on the children because she's the first person they see outside their home in the morning, and she helps them set their tone for the day. The supervisor could help her recognize that her interactions with the children actually have an impact on their future success, which of course they do. People generally want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. Most people aren't in it just for a paycheck. They want to know that the work that they are doing provides value and has a positive impact all around them. So employees are typically demotivated when they perceive that the work they are doing has no meaning and doesn't provide value. There have been study after study that shows that when work is done and thrown in the trash, people don't do it anymore. They quit doing it. So it's imperative that business leaders align the work that employees are doing every day with the important things that drive success. One way to do that is with a tool like the Balance Scorecard. There are many strategy management tools out there. The Balance Scorecard is one that I like to talk about. So without going into detail, that might be a topic for another time. The Balance Scorecard is a way to link the activities that are done every day with the vision. So you define the objectives, and I mentioned this briefly before, but you define the objectives across multiple perspectives and then attach the initiatives and the measures to them. So Albert Einstein said, vision without execution is merely hallucination. So the Balance Scorecard was actually created as a way to translate strategy into action, to sort of take it out of that nebulous sphere and bring it into reality and into the day-to-day life. So that's one way that you can show employees their contribution to success. Dale Carnegie Training and MSWARS Research conducted a study a while back to determine the drivers of employee engagement. So according to that study, it's emotions that drive engagement. Employees who have high levels of enthusiasm, inspiration, empowerment, and confidence are 5 times more engaged than employees who have negative emotions. So how do you tap into those emotions? Leaders need to project optimism in their interactions with employees at all levels. So as we all know, negativity breeds negativity. There is nothing more demotivating than a boss who complains about everyone and everything around him or her. Leaders also need to build a climate of trust. They need to be transparent and consistent in their actions and shouldn't gossip about employees to their coworkers. Gossip has negative consequences in any situation, but when it's perpetrated by someone an employee is supposed to respect and follow, trust is immediately diminished and relationships are weakened. Modern Survey did this study and report that 95% of fully engaged employees say that they trust their direct manager. That contrasts with 7% of disengaged managers and 32% of direct managers. So back to Simon Sinek in his book, Leaders Eat Last, Simon talks about why good leaders make employees feel safe. He calls it the circle of safety. He says that an environment of trust and cooperation results when people feel safe. So put simply, when people have to manage dangers from inside the organization, from the people around them that are supposed to make them feel safe, the organization itself is less able to face those dangers from outside, like competition. So when leaders make the choice of putting the well-being of people inside the organization first, remarkable things happen. So we'll get you back involved now and ask the question of how you measure engagement at your organization. So maybe you don't, or employee surveys is one way. There are other measures that we're going to talk about, but maybe behavioral type measures, or maybe you use surveys and the other measures. So I'll turn it back to Joanne to turn that poll on.
Okay. So everyone, the poll is now up. If you could please vote and tell us how you measure employee engagement today. And we'll give that about 10 more seconds. And we'll see where that stands. Okay, so I'll close the poll now and share it for everyone. So Jennifer, those are the results.
Great. Okay, most people, 57%, do not, and 39% use employee surveys, with only 4% reporting that they do surveys as well as other measures. So that's interesting to see that most people don't. So let's jump back into it and talk about a few ways that you can measure it.
Okay. All right, back to you, Jennifer.
Great. Okay, well, once we have committed to the employee, shown them the contribution to success, we've fostered positivity, and we've built this climate of trust, now we have to measure it to make sure that it's going in the right direction. So an obvious way to measure employee engagement is polls or surveys. So simply ask the employees a series of questions about how they feel about the company. Employee engagement surveys are a valuable tool if they're given in the right environment, but it has to be an environment where employees trust the leaders. Without that trust, you're not likely to get honest results, especially in smaller companies where maybe employees might fear that they're not anonymous if they're supposed to be, or maybe they'll be found out if they're critical towards the company. And then there's other pitfalls of measuring engagement through surveys. So it could be bias from recent events, potential for gaming, or employees telling you what you want to hear rather than what they really think. Engagement is all about attitudes and feelings. So those are things that can change frequently, and the survey results will only tell you about a point in time. It doesn't necessarily reflect an employee's overarching attitude towards the company. So it is certainly helpful to find out what employees perceive their engagement levels to be. There's more straightforward data that is grounded in behaviors that companies can gather to find out the real engagement levels of employees. And so we've decided, or we've talked about how employment and engagement drives behavior. It naturally follows that behavior is a more accurate indicator to use in measuring an employee's engagement level. There was a movie called Moneyball in 2011 starring Brad Pitt. So it was based on a 2003 book by, also called Moneyball, written by author Michael Lewis, I think it was. So in the book, they tell the story of a cash-strapped Oakland Athletics baseball team. So they were faced with all their star players leaving, and the general manager, Billy Beane, has to assemble this team with the reportedly most limited payroll budget that had ever been in baseball. So he, in a chance meeting, he meets Peter Brand, who's a Yale economics graduate. He has some really unconventional ideas. So they decided they were going to ignore all the traditional wisdom about metrics like batting averages and RBIs and focus on more rigorous statistical analysis about player performance. So the team season took a sharp turn when they took the data analytics a step further and used their insight to make day-to-day decisions, like things like having the batters take more pitches to wear out the opposing pitcher. So when they applied the analytics to every day, great things happened. So data analytics has been used in business to mine consumer and industry information for years. The concept of expanding data analytics, the concept has been expanded to talent management and is now being practiced more and is often referred to as people analytics. That concept gets me really excited because it puts the numbers to something that's traditionally been considered very soft in judging how people feel. So in other words, gathering and taking a deep dive into the right data about employee behavior can help employers build measures to tell them if their employees are engaged. One behavioral measure is discretionary effort. So this is the amount of time that is spent working outside of normal working hours. And I always caution, this is not to say that employees should be expected to sacrifice their personal life for the sake of the company. Employees should be recognized always for quality over quantity of work. But for this purpose, you're just using past information about the amount of extra effort employees chose to put forth so that you can make an assessment about their engagement levels. Another behavioral measure of engagement is how many projects employees volunteer for. Employees who are engaged view opportunities to work on projects outside of their normal job duties as a privilege they can look forward to, even if it means putting in extra time. Engaged employees seek out opportunities to work on projects because they have confidence that the work will pay off. And there's often payoffs for the company as well. We all know that when you get people from different teams in to look at things from different perspectives, it also usually has great value to the company. So opening up projects company-wide is sometimes a great idea. Employees who believe that their opinions matter will often look for better ways to do things and then bring their suggestions to the managers. If they don't care about the company and they don't really care if it's the best way to do something, they're not going to bring up the suggestions. But if they're engaged and they care, then they'll do that. And then to take it a step further, the number of suggestions that are accepted can be an indication of alignment of the employees with the company. So the old-fashioned suggestion box here is probably the best symbol of fake empowerment, but there are many other ways that we can do that today. There are many social media type SaaS applications that you can set up for communication within the company so that leaders can sort of stand around the virtual water cooler and hear what the employees are saying. And finally, do employees seek out training opportunities? Engaged employees definitely want to learn more so that they can grow professionally and further the company's success. So as we all know, actions speak louder than words. While it's important to seek feedback from employees through surveys, studying employee behavior gives leaders quantifiable insight into how employees feel about the company. And nobody knows about the benefits of employee engagement like Campbell's Soup Company. Doug Conant was brought in from Nabisco to be CEO of Campbell's Soup in 2001. At that time, the brand was a little bit stale, and intense competition had caused a decline in the company's biggest and most well-known product line, which is, of course, condensed soup. In 2002, Campbell's had a very grim employee engagement outlook. The numbers were the worst among the Fortune 500 companies. They actually brought Gallup in and studied the engagement levels and management and found that 62% considered themselves not actively engaged and 12% considered themselves actively disengaged. So as a financial result, also the financial results were just as bad as the engagement results, and the stock prices were in sharp decline. So when he came in, Conant noted that the company had a really toxic culture, that trust was low, management systems were dysfunctional, and he believed in employee engagement. He still does. He was critical to the turnaround. He knew that was critical to the turnaround he was charged with facilitating at Campbell's. So he spent the next several years putting employee engagement front and center in the organization and keeping the energy around it alive in order to sort of revitalize the culture. He let people know his intention, he held them accountable, and he held himself as well as the people accountable to his new standards. The results were remarkable, of course. By 2009, engagement levels were drastically improved. They had 68% of employees stating that they were actively engaged, and only 3% reporting that they were actively disengaged. That's a ratio of 23 to 1, and remember we talked about best in class as a ratio of 12 to 1. So they really knocked it out of the park. So, of course, the financial results followed. Campbell's organically increased its earnings per share its earnings. Its earnings per share were growing at 5 to 10% per year, and the company was outperforming both the S&P Food Group and the S&P 500. So these are all very real results. So Peter Drucker famously said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, I believe that culture and strategy should just be friends and have breakfast together. A strong culture of engagement, a defined organizational strategy that's built on a foundation of sound internal control are critical to sustained success. So a great culture is one where employees are engaged with the strategy and, more important, recognize their contribution towards that strategy. Focusing on culture without strategy won't take a company where it wants to go because employees won't know what to do. Focusing on strategy without culture will result in disengaged employees who simply don't care if the company achieves the vision. So great leaders are the ones who recognize the importance of balancing culture and engagement and have a strategy that is underpinned by internal controls. So great leaders also focus on building a culture where employees know and are involved in the strategy, which leads to better business results, which in turn results in a better culture. So it's a never-ending cycle where everyone wins. So thank you for joining me today. It has certainly been a pleasure to talk to you about employee engagement. Now, go take a look in your own organization and see if you see the 3 key ingredients to a happy workplace there. You can't just consider these things a project that can be completed and shelved. It has to become a part of the fabric of the organization that is not just talked about, but lived every day. So I think we're going to open it up for questions now.
Okay, actually, first I'm just going to do a quick wrap-up, and then we'll get to questions, which is a good reminder. Cool. So if anyone has any questions that have come up with Jennifer's fantastic presentation, please put that in the question box, and we'll get to that at the end of the presentation. So Jennifer, I really appreciated your presentation. You had great stories in there, relevant research, as well as how to put that research to good use. So I hope our participants got a lot of tips from that. So I'd just like to wrap up by briefly discussing the impact of budgeting on employee engagement. So it may not be very intuitive to think of budgeting and employee engagement together, but it does take the right team, an informed and engaged team, working together to make the right decisions to create the budget and execute the plan. And at Accelerant, we know from experience that the right kind of budgeting solution can actually help organizations engage employees instead of frustrating them, and build a more committed workforce by empowering them to take more ownership over the process. You want your employees to be committed to the company and to your strategic plan. And while there are so many tools and programs aimed at increasing engagement, adapting a collaborative budgeting process is one simple way to turn a mandatory procedure into an effective employee engagement strategy. And collaborative budgeting builds on many of the areas that Jennifer spoke about, including clear communication of the organization's strategy, input and ownership over one's role, and respect for the individual's subject matter expertise. And collaborative budgeting empowers the people who are impacted by a budget to be actively involved in the budget creation process. It is at the core a communications process. So leadership communicates the strategic plan, objectives, and goals. And then the budgeting managers use their individual areas of expertise and frontline experience to build a budget designed to achieve that strategy. It's the bottoms-up approach that lends to the creations of budgets that are much more achievable than top-down budgets imposed on a company by senior management. Because when upper management requests budgetary input from employees, with this bottoms-up approach, they're fostering teamwork, cohesiveness, and trust, all vital elements of business success. And perhaps surprisingly, motivation is increased because budget holders are more likely to enjoy working to achieve a budget that they have been involved in setting rather than one that has been imposed upon them from above. And forecasting is also improved because managers who are doing a job on a day-to-day basis are likely to have a better idea of what is achievable and what is likely to happen in the forthcoming period. And not so surprisingly, this all adds up to better results and cost control. Because as the executor of the budget, the manager is likely better able to control the costs than anyone else in the company and will have a vested personal ownership in the organization's success. These are the types of people you want on your team. So when employees are empowered to outline their ideas for the wisest use of funds explain their reasoning, and have a discussion with management about available resources and expectations, they own their numbers and take accountability for their decisions. This leads to a stronger sense of connection and commitment to the organization. Even if these employees don't ultimately end up with an ideal budget, all parties understand each other's outlook and expectations and can work together to make the most of the budget that they do have. When an organization prioritizes engagement, communication, and collaboration, the budget can actually become a numerical expression of the strategic plan. And this is ultimately what all organizations, corporate, nonprofit, educational, mission-driven, are hoping for, and the mission we're here to support at Accelerant. So it's time now to wrap up and move on to our question and answer session. So let me see what has come in, and let's start with this question. We have a few questions, and we have about 4 minutes, so we'll probably get to 2 or 3. So the first question, Jennifer, for you is, how important are generational differences in employee engagement? Do you engage millennials differently than Gen X and baby boomers?
Well, you have to be careful generalizing about the generations, but there definitely are differences, and I think that everybody agrees with that. So just speaking very generally, millennials it's interesting to work with millennials in the workplace because technology is second nature to them. I think that they are the ones who were born in maybe the early 80s on. So technology is pretty much second nature. They prefer social media, texting, IM, those methods of communication. What I think is very interesting is that they demand instant access to information because that's what they're used to. They're able, if you have a question, you Google it, you ask Siri, you have information. So they're not going to wait for the performance review period. They want to be told that they're working effectively or given even the criticism immediately rather than waiting. Another interesting thing about millennials is they expect access to people at the top. There's not this separation. They're following the celebrities on Instagram, which makes them feel like, or whatever social media they're using, makes them feel connected. So they don't hold the people at the top in as high esteem. That's not to say they don't respect them. They just don't feel the separation that maybe some of us from the generations before might feel. So they expect access to the people at the top. So they want those connections. And then, of course, Generation X, they're the self-sufficient. They're the latchkey generation. So they want to work independently. And then, of course, the baby boomers are nearing retirement now, but they want the face-to-face communication. So they're very hardworking. They're motivated by position and prestige and those sorts of things because they take a real sense of pride in their work. That's their foundation. So there's certainly differences, but of course the heart of any engagement strategy is to get to know people individually. So that's a great question.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Here's another question that came in from our audience. It says, engagement is an ongoing and continuous process. Do you have any statistics in terms of how engaged companies or employees continue to stay in that level over the years?
Well, it's definitely a continuous process. I don't have that research right here handy, but it's definitely a continuous process. Like I mentioned earlier, you cannot just do it and put it on the shelf. It has to become a living, breathing part of the organization. It has to be a part of the culture, and you have to be very careful with culture because it's very damaging when what you say you do is not what you do. I mean, I think that Enron had as one of their core values integrity and honesty. So things that are on the wall are not necessarily the things that are lived, and I'm sure that most people at Enron certainly were, but it's something that has to be ingrained. So it's what people say about you and what people see in what you do, not just what you say. So in terms of the culture, in order to keep it going, you do have to bring it in and live it and breathe it and talk about it and actually, again, beliefs drive behavior. So the people have to believe in it, especially the leaders. New Year's resolutions are something that people joke about because you're going to keep your resolution for a week or two. And I think that that's because people focus on the actual behavior. So if you want to exercise every day, your resolution is exercise every day, rather than going back to the belief behind the behavior. So if I believe if I'm going to exercise every day, that's going to make me healthier, live longer, lose weight, whatever it is that your goal might be. So if you're focused on the belief and you believe in that, and you believe that you can do it, and you believe that it's worthwhile and more worthwhile than what your time spent elsewhere could be, then you're more likely to achieve that. And the same goes within organizations. The leaders have to believe that making this change and genuinely investing in people and supporting their success is number one priority, and then the results will follow. So I think that's key to the ongoing and continuous improvement.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. It looks like we're just about out of time, so let me wrap up. We hope that everyone enjoyed today's webinar. I certainly did, and thank you, Jennifer, so much for a fantastic presentation. It was very informative and practical.
Well, thank you.
And my pleasure. You can find more resources on employee engagement on our website, Accelerant.com. This webinar has been recorded, and it will be up on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to access that through our website, Accelerant.com. If you'd like to have a discussion about how our product can support and encourage employee engagement in your organization, please contact us at info@Accelerant.com and follow us on Twitter @Accelerant. So thank you, everyone, for taking your time out today to listen to our Accelerant Thought Leadership Series webinar, Maximize Employee Engagement to Drive Financial Results. Have a great rest of your day.